In 133 BC, Emperor Wu of Han engineered a colossal ambush at Mayi, aiming to completely wipe out the Xiongnu forces. However, the meticulously crafted plan leaked at the absolute last minute. Sensing the trap, the Xiongnu Chanyu immediately ordered a retreat, withdrawing his 100,000 horsemen from the border. Consequently, the 300,000 Han troops left in pursuit found themselves chasing nothing but empty dust, watching years of strategic preparation evaporate into thin air. Worse still, this failed operation shattered the 67 years of fragile peace between the Han and the Xiongnu, a stability previously maintained through the heavy price of marrying off royal princesses and paying lavish tributes. The Xiongnu retaliation was swift, merciless, and savage. They launched a massive offensive along the entire frontier, simultaneously storming border towns, slaughtering isolated garrisons, and dragging entire civilian populations into brutal captivity. Beacon fires signaling danger burned continuously from autumn through the following spring, as towns fell one after another. The peace that had endured for nearly 7 decades was completely demolished in a matter of months. At the imperial court, the officials who had aggressively pushed for war shifted from arrogance to panic, desperately blaming one another for the disaster. Meanwhile, the common people came to a grim realization. Their emperor had shattered the peace, yet possessed no means to protect them. Inside the secluded chambers of the Wei Qing palace, Emperor Wu waited in isolation. At just 23 years old, he had gambled his entire reign on the Mayi ambush, and he had lost spectacularly. The Xiongnu vengeance now flooded the borders, and he had no dam to hold it back. Not a single veteran general could offer him any hope. Having known only long periods of peace under previous emperors, these military commanders spoke only of defensive posture, of rebuilding the old marriage alliances, and reiterated the ancient defeatist saying that the Xiongnu were fundamentally invincible. Emperor Wu listened to their counsel in absolute freezing silence. He realized he did not need cautious advisors. He needed a blade. Yet, from 133 to 129 BC, across 4 agonizing years, that blade remained nowhere to be found. The frontier beacons never went dark. Every autumn, the Xiongnu rode south with impunity, harvesting human lives like crops, while small-scale Han counterattacks failed miserably. Emperor Wu shut himself away from the court, spending his days and nights hunched over military maps and sand tables, plotting a way out. He understood the core tactical problem. The traditional Han infantry squares and heavy war chariots were built exclusively for plains warfare. Once they ventured beyond the northern border, they faced a vast, featureless steppe with no roads, no defensive walls, and no sense of direction. Han's supply lines would stretch for hundreds of miles until the armies literally starved. In stark contrast, the Xiongnu lived permanently on horseback and required no supply lines at all. To seek them out meant getting lost in the wilderness. To ignore them meant they would appear at your doorstep without warning. This fundamental chasm between the two military systems could not be bridged by sheer numbers alone. In 129 BC, the Xiongnu launched yet another devastating offensive, this time directly targeting the crucial Xiongnu commandery. As desperate border reports flooded Chang'an, signaling that Xiongnu was on the verge of total collapse, Emperor Wu decided he would no longer play defense. He resolved to send 4 separate armies simultaneously, driving deep into the treacherous steppe. While no one at court supported such a reckless plan, no one dared to voice an objection against the furious emperor. Among the 4 designated armies, the first 3 were placed under the command of the empire's most experienced veterans, including Li Guang, the most celebrated commander against the northern nomads. However, when it came to the 4th army, the emperor's finger paused on the map. This force was ordered to bypass the main Xiongnu host entirely and drive straight into their vulnerable rear. The choice of commander for this final, high-risk army caused an immediate uproar. The selected man had never independently led a single battle in his life, and senior officials spoke his name only with open contempt. No one could fathom why the emperor would choose him. Perhaps no seasoned general was willing to accept such a suicidal mission, or perhaps the emperor, having already placed all his massive bets, was simply throwing his last die. When the 4 armies marched out into the unknown, the subsequent reports hit Chang'an like a knife. Li Guang's legendary army was completely encircled and annihilated. The general himself was captured, escaping only by feigning death, stealing a horse, and fleeing back alone. The second army was utterly routed, losing 7,000 out of its 10,000 men. The third army wandered aimlessly across the steppe and returned empty-handed, having failed to find a single enemy. 3 crushing reports of defeat lay before the emperor, plunging the court into a dead silence, where no one dared to meet his gaze. The only remaining news was from the mysterious 4th army. In fact, there was no news at all. 10,000 cavalrymen had completely vanished into the boundless grasslands, leaving no messengers and no signals. The court officials shook their heads in resignation, assuming the entire force was dead. Emperor Wu sat helpless on his throne, clinging desperately to his final, unspoken hope as all of China endured a sleepless night. The commander of that silent 4th army was named Wei Qing. At court, his name carried a singular, derogatory connotation. His half-sister was the emperor's favored consort, making him a royal in law, a mere shadow who had supposedly risen to prominence through the influence of a woman. No one knew his true origins, and frankly, no one among the nobility cared to know. To understand the man, one had to wind the clock back 20 years to the stables of the Marquis of Pingyang. There, a young boy crouched in the dirt, grooming a massive warhorse. He was a household slave, tasked with the menial labor of feeding horses, saddling them, leading them out, and literally kneeling on all fours, to serve as a human mounting block for his masters. No one bothered to call him by a proper name. They simply referred to him as that riding slave. He bore the surname Wei from his mother, a humble bondwoman working in the estate's weaving room. She had given birth to several children by different fathers, and Wei Qing was the middle child, sharing no paternal lineage with his siblings, only a mother and the inherited status of a slave. His biological father, a minor county clerk named Ji, had a brief, fleeting encounter with the bondwoman during a passing funeral procession before returning to his own family, never to appear again. Thus, on the official slave registry, the boy was listed under his mother's surname, a servant without a recognized father. During his childhood, his mother sent him to live in his biological father's household, hoping for a better life. Instead, he became the lowest creature in the residence. The legal wife openly despised his existence, while the legitimate sons treated him as a common servant, forcing him to herd sheep, gather firewood, and perform the most degrading labor. They routinely mocked him as a bastard. He survived on cold scraps, left over by others, and slept on a bed of hay next to the sheep pen, where the winter wind knifes ruthlessly through the cracks in the door. He tried his best to fit in, working tirelessly, obeying every command, and never talking back. Yet, his efforts were entirely useless. His very existence was seen as a living insult, a constant, shameful proof of a husband's infidelity. They could not legally kill him, so they chose to make him live like a dog. Eventually, the boy could take no more and left. He deliberately chose to return to being a state slave with dignity, rather than remain a son without it. Back at the Marquis's estate, he was reassigned to the stables as a riding slave, where he truly learned to ride. This was not the ceremonial, elegant riding practiced by the nobility, but the rugged, brutal horsemanship required for the hunt. He mastered the art of balancing at a full gallop, ducking beneath low branches, and gripping the horse tightly with only his thighs to free both hands for combat, learning exactly how to roll clear from a catastrophic fall. Through endless hours, serving as a beater in the hunting squads, he learned to read the terrain with flawless accuracy. He discovered which patches of lush grass hid deadly swamps, which rushing streams could be safely forded, and which high ridges concealed treacherous ravines. Furthermore, he learned the art of tracking and encirclement, often detailed to the flanks, to cut off the escape routes of wild prey. A task requiring a precise, split-second judgment of when to close in, mobility, tracking, flanking, and encircling. These were the exact skills he used to hunt beasts on the Marquis's estate. Ironically, on the vast steppes to the north, the Xiongnu utilized the exact same military logic. The only difference was that they hunted people. At the time, Wei Qing had no idea what these hard-earned skills were actually worth. He was just a low-born riding slave, destined, barring any accident, to grow old and be buried in an unmarked grave. The dramatic crack in his destiny came through his half-sister, Wei Zifu, a singer in the Marquis's household. Her striking looks and angelic voice earned her a selection for Princess Pingyang's entertainment troupe. In 139 BC, Emperor Wu spent a night at the princess's estate, and Wei Zifu was brought out to perform. The moment she sang, the emperor set down his cup in admiration. Soon after, she entered the imperial harem, meaning the daughter of a bondwoman had successfully entered the absolute center of empire power. For the stable slave, this sudden stroke of fortune translated into a low-level job in the capital. He was summoned to serve as a guard at the Jianzhang Palace, a simple gatekeeper far removed from real political influence. However, simply being associated with the emperor's new favorite invited a death sentence from jealous rivals. A powerful nobleman had Wei Qing kidnapped, locking him in a dark cell with the intention of executing him secretly. Knowing full well that no one would investigate the sudden disappearance of a former riding slave. Fortunately, his friends from the palace guards, men of similarly humble origins who refused to abandon him, risked their own lives to break into the compound and rescue him. Upon learning of the incident, Emperor Wu chose not to launch a dangerous investigation into the powerful kidnappers. Instead, he boldly promoted Wei Qing to the rank of Grand Master of the palace, a civil position that allowed him to directly advise the throne. By doing so, the emperor was signaling a clear message to the court. This man is under my personal protection. Despite this, the old nobility continued to look down on him with deep disdain. In their eyes, he was a man who had never fought, possessed zero military experience, and would forever remain a pathetic shadow riding the coattails of his sister. For nearly 10 years, Wei Qing served quietly as a civil official, listening to the endless, cyclical debates regarding the Xiongnu threat. The aggressive war party shouted for blood, while the cautious peace party argued for diplomacy. Yet, neither side could answer the fundamental question. If we choose to fight, how exactly do we win? Wei Qing merely stood in the far corner of the grand hall, remaining completely silent. When Xiongnu Commandery fell under imminent threat, and Emperor Wu desperately ordered the mobilization of 4 armies, 3 positions went to seasoned, legendary generals. The 4th route, the most difficult, unpredictable, and seemingly hopeless path, was handed directly to Wei Qing. Perhaps no other general was willing to risk their reputation on it. Or perhaps the emperor trusted him explicitly due to the consort connection. But perhaps, most crucially, the emperor realized that every experienced general had lost consistently for decades. Their conventional experience was entirely bankrupt. Why not gamble on a man completely unshackled by a lifetime of traditional failures? Furthermore, the emperor remembered that this man had been a riding slave. He had spent his youth riding through wild grasslands, chasing elusive game, and intimately understood terrain that lacked roads. He was a man who intimately knew the reality of hunger, biting wind, and getting lost, qualities that none of the court's pampered generals who had never truly lived in the saddle possessed. With the simple command to go, Wei Qing marched out, and no one knew if he would ever return. Eventually, they located the dragon's altar. This was not a conventional city, as the nomadic Xiongnu built no permanent structures, but rather their most sacred ceremonial ground. Featuring earthen altars raised for heaven worship, it served as the absolute spiritual heart of the entire steppe empire. Every autumn, all the fragmented tribes would gather at this holy site to perform crucial ritual sacrifices. No Han soldier had ever set foot on this forbidden ground, since the legendary Modu Chanyu had first forged the Xiongnu Empire. When Wei Qing's cavalry charged out of the horizon, leaving only ritual personnel and a small ceremonial guard behind. It had never even occurred to the Xiongnu that a battle could take place here. This holy site was not a military installation, and they were over 400 li deep into the safety of the steppe. Suddenly, Black arrows filled the northern sky as the Han cavalry rolled into the sacred grounds like a sudden thunderstorm. The Xiongnu scrambled frantically to mount their horses, but their defensive formation was completely shattered before it could even form. Han horsemen cut ruthlessly through the camps, trampling ceremonial tents and stitching volleys of arrows across the altar grounds. Hundreds of enemies were cut down in minutes, including high-ranking shishamans and prominent nobles, who were actively officiating the sacred rites. Crucial ceremonial vessels were seized, vast herds of livestock were driven off, and the high earthen altar was set ablaze. Knowing the immense danger of a pursuit once word spread, Wei Qing did not linger to celebrate. He quickly gathered his disciplined troops, organized the prisoners, secured the plunder, and raced back toward the south at a blistering pace. He had calculated the timing precisely. Before the main Xiongnu forces could even comprehend what had transpired at their spiritual heart, Wei Qing was already safely back behind the Han defensive lines. The resulting battle report was brief, but it struck Chang'an like a sudden thunderbolt. Hundreds of enemy heads were taken, and the sacred dragon's altar was reduced to ashes. It was the first definitive Han victory against the Xiongnu in recorded history, single-handedly wiping away the deep shame of multiple generations. Over 70 years of passive defense, endless court quarrels, and the catastrophic defeat of 3 veteran armies were instantly eclipsed by the Fourth Army, led by a former slave, which had driven a knife straight into the enemy's spiritual core. Over the next 6 years, Wei Qing fought 5 major campaigns, delivering 5 consecutive, flawless victories. Then came the definitive battle that changed the geography of the empire forever. In 127 BC, Emperor Wu fixed his strategic gaze on the Ordos Loop, the highly fertile Hetao region cradled inside the great bend of the Yellow River. It was widely considered the finest pasture land on the steppe, and the Xiongnu routinely used it as a staging ground to launch their deepest, most destructive raids into Han territory. The region was a figurative dagger, held directly against the empire's chest, located less than 400 li from Chang'an. Xiongnu cavalry riding from the Ordos could realistically reach the gates of the Weiyang Palace in a mere 10 days. Emperor Wu sent Wei Qing with a singular directive: pull out that dagger. Wei Qing chose not to launch a conventional frontal assault from the south. He knew that a frontal attack against an enemy possessing complete mobility and terrain advantage was a tactical nightmare. Even if you managed to win, they would simply ride away into the desert and return the moment your army left. Instead, he marched his forces from Yunzhong and swung rapidly westward along the northern bank of the Yellow River at high speed. He executed a massive loop extending over hundreds of miles, driving deep into the enemy's unsuspecting rear. His highly disciplined cavalry carried minimal rations to maximize their speed. Before the Xiongnu commanders even realized what was happening, Han troops suddenly materialized directly on their northern escape routes. Caught in a brilliant tactical trap, the Xiongnu commanders chose to abandon their people rather than fight. They burst northward with only their personal bodyguards, leaving behind their tribes. their immense wealth of livestock, and the entire strategic Ordos region. The operation yielded over 2,300 enemy heads, thousands of prisoners, and over 1 million head of valuable livestock. More importantly, the Han Empire reclaimed the Ordos permanently. Emperor Wu immediately established the Shuofang commandery on the land, colonizing it with hundreds of thousands of citizens and constructing massive fortifications. The Xiongnu would never again ride south from that ground toward Chang'an. This brilliant operation defined Wei Qing's signature art of war. Grand flanking marches, sudden encirclement, and completely cutting off the enemy's retreat, effectively ending wars before the actual battles truly began. Next came the campaign into the desert south. In 124 BC, Wei Qing led 30,000 elite cavalry beyond the border, specifically targeting the right worthy king, the powerful ruler of the western Xiongnu territories, who was second in power only to the Chanyu himself. After losing the Ordos region, the king had withdrawn deep into the safety of the steppe, absolutely certain that the Han military would never possess the capability to pursue him that far out. He was dead wrong. Wei Qing executed a grueling, forced march through the dead of night, arriving at the king's massive encampment in the pitch darkness just before dawn. At that exact moment, the right worthy king was inside his tent, drinking heavily, completely assured by his scouts' earlier reports that the Han forces were still hundreds of li away. What followed was total, unmitigated destruction. The king barely escaped, fleeing north into the dark with a mere few hundred guards, completely abandoning his soldiers, his wives, his military stores, and his vast herds to the victors. The haul was staggering. Over 10 high-ranking Xiongnu nobles, 15,000 tribespeople, and hundreds of thousands of livestock were captured. Upon receiving the news, Emperor Wu could not even wait for Wei Qing to return to Chang'an to honor him. He immediately dispatched a high envoy to meet the advancing army directly at the border, appointing Wei Qing to the supreme rank of generalissimo right there in the open field. The former slave who had once knelt in the dirt to saddle horses was now the undisputed supreme commander of the entire empire's armed forces. In the following years, Wei Qing continued to lead further expeditions into the north, with each campaign returning in triumph. The Xiongnu grew to terrified of his military banner, and his name spread like a curse across the steppe. He won his wars through supreme mobility and brilliant maneuver, not by piling up the corpses of his own soldiers. Finally, in 119 BC, Emperor Wu launched the ultimate campaign, the largest military expedition in Han history. The emperor poured the entire economic and human strength of the nation into the northern desert with a singular, definitive goal: find and destroy the Chanyu's main army once and for all. Wei Qing once again led the vanguard, and once again he delivered a crushing victory. Following this great northern campaign, the Han Empire entered an unprecedented era of security. The Xiongnu had fled so far into the harsh northern wastes that no nomadic royal court remained south of the vast Gobi Desert. In a mere 7 years, Wei Qing had risen from the absolute bottom of society as a stable slave to become the Grand Marshal and Generalissimo. the supreme military commander of the civilized world. His half-sister, Wei Zifu, was now the reigning empress, and his young nephew, Liu Ju, was the crowned crown prince of the empire. Within his hands rested the heaviest, most terrifying concentration of military power in the nation. According to the rigid logic of every great civilization's history, what follows next is entirely predictable. The victorious general invariably demands more power. The general gradually seizes political control. The general eventually becomes king, or is preemptively murdered by a paranoid monarch. The Romans knew this script intimately. In that exact same era across the world, Marius and Sulla were already turning their loyal legions into private political armies, dragging the Roman Republic toward catastrophic civil war, and Julius Caesar would soon march his troops across the Rubicon. History dictates that once a general firmly grips the sword of supreme power, he never willingly lets it go. Yet, Wei Qing let it go. He crossed no river, mobilized no coup, and demanded no crown. Instead, he did something entirely incomprehensible within the historical logic of absolute power. He simply continued to be a quiet, fiercely loyal subject of the throne. He was not forced into submission, nor was he stripped of his vast authority. He chose this path actively, clear-mindedly, and entirely willingly. When a man possessing absolute military power, accountable to no one but a distant emperor, chooses to consciously restrain himself, that immense strength can only come from deep within his own character. Two specific historical events reveal the true depth of this man far more than any of his celebrated battles on the steppe. First, he steadfastly refused to build his own political power network. After his promotion to generalissimo, following their return from the freezing wastes of the northern desert, no major war broke out between the Han Empire and the Xiongnu for over a decade. Wei Qing aged quietly within the fragile peace that he had personally won with his sword. His name gradually faded from the frantic border battle reports, as a brand new generation of ambitious young generals rose to prominence, and the empire's fickle spotlight followed these fresh faces into lightning raids across the desert. He willingly withdrew into his private residence, into absolute silence, and into the long shadows of history. In 106 BC, Wei Qing died peacefully of illness. Emperor Wu bestowed upon him the highly honorable posthumous name of Lai, meaning one who achieved greatness, through martial valor, and buried him in a massive tomb shaped like a mountain directly beside his own future resting place at Morling. He had guarded the frontiers of an empire in life, and in death he lay forever beside the Son of Heaven. Yet, his true legacy lies not in the territory he conquered, but in what he deliberately chose not to do. He did not seize the throne, he did not seek bloody revenge against his detractors, and he did not make himself a king. He successfully circumvented the tragic, violent ends that consumed almost every other great general in Rome, Persia, and across the broader pages of human history. Within the incredibly harsh, paranoid limits of an absolute autocracy, he walked an almost impossible path. Supreme military achievement, peaceful political withdrawal, and a natural death. He single-handedly saved an empire, and then quietly allowed that same empire to forget his name. In those quiet years after Wei Qing had first returned to Chang'an and retreated into his legendary silence, the imperial court had already begun whispering another name with immense excitement. This rising young star was also born a slave and had also emerged from the humble Wei household. He was none other than Wei Qing's own nephew. At just 18 years old, during his very first military campaign, this audacious teenager had taken a mere 800 elite cavalrymen, split away from the main army entirely, and galloped hundreds of miles deep into enemy territory alone.